Adaptavist. Hello and welcome to our latest Adaptavist Expert Hour, where today we'll be discussing how adaptive work systems unlock autonomy, motivation and growth. I'm Reema, Lidhar, Partner Marketing Manager at Adaptavist, and I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm really pleased to be joined today by a fantastic panel of experts from Adaptavist and Tempo. So let's get everybody introduced. So we have Lisa Schaffer, a global global work management practice head at Adaptavist, Attila Benares, Senior Strategic Advisor for Work Manager at Adaptavist, Vic Chynoweth, CEO at Tempo, Rekha Raghu, VP of Product at Tempo also, and then we have Kevin Nanney, Chief Product Officer at Tempo. So let's get started. So over the last 12 months, we've seen the emergence of something called quiet cracking. It's a workplace phenomenon where people experience persistent sense of dissatisfaction at work, while gradually leads to disengagement, declining performance, and ultimately a desire to leave. This causes some serious implications, not only on employees, but also innovation, productivity, and long-term business growth. To better understand this, we conducted a research in October called the Human Cost of Digital Transformation. We surveyed around 4,000 knowledge workers across UK, US, Germany and Canada to understand the scale of the problem and the role technology and work design play in employee happiness and performance. And the findings were so fascinating, and some insights were exciting to unpack today with our panel. So Lisa, let's get started. The human cost of digital transformation highlights a sharp drop in motivation and sort of work trend whereby employees experience a silent decline in motivation, performance and general well-being due to factors such as poor management, declining growth opportunities and a lack of a connection to their jobs. As leaders, where do you think we've gone wrong in how we've designed work, and what is one thing you would change immediately to restore autonomy without losing control?
Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to start off by sort of making a statement around technology, and it really isn't the technology that burns us out or burns our people out. It is the unclear expectations by leadership. It is surveillance, for want of a better word, or micromanagement, and sort of tool sprawl. The fix isn't, more adoption. It really is an intentional operational design or operating design. So instead of teaching features and tools, you're focusing on teaching the workflows of the business and the expectations that are set from the outset. Workflow literacy really does answer some real questions our employees, our humans question, and that is, when does work become real? Who decides priority? Where do decisions live? And what happens if something is blocked? And how do I know if I'm doing the right thing? So in terms of what leaders can do right now to change things, it really is creating that environment, that psychological safety for their people to reward early visibility and not silent perfection. And communication is a big area that can be improved on, defining, what is the purpose of our tools and actually enforcing it. And then the third area I would say is measuring impact rather than activities. So defining what those outcomes are that we're trying to achieve as an organization, and then measuring that instead of busy work.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Attila, I'm going to build on the leadership perspective, and sort of many managers fear that giving more autonomy leads to inconsistency or lower standards, so they default to micromanagement. How do you practically equip managers to guide without dictating and hold them accountable?
Guiding without dictating is a balancing act, a pendulum that swings between autonomy and standardization. Sometimes tighter controls are needed, other times things can be looser. Fundamentally, this is a boundaries conversation. If we define the guardrails within which people have autonomy, they can move with speed and with purpose and without fear of consequence. Think of it as a football pitch. If we set the boundaries and we set the rules within those boundaries, the what and the why of things, then we can step back and let the play unfold, the how. So the trick here is to define the pitch, not the play. That said, standardization is increasing, and rightfully so. SaaS solutions bring consistency, and stakeholders expect ever-increasing efficiency from their cost structures. We stop reinventing the wheel when we use patterns and blueprints and runbooks to drive use and predictability. But too much of a factory model approach can reduce autonomy and stifle innovative thinking. To stay competitive, sometimes we need to cull outside of the lines. Not always, otherwise we drift back to chaos. So there's a spectrum between autonomy and standardization. People worry that the play will go wrong, but the goal is to score, to get the ball in the back of the net. Set plays are a means to an end, not the game itself. Not everything can or should be standardized, and too much standardization limits autonomy. Too much autonomy can feel chaotic. The aim is to create aligned autonomy. So pragmatic standardization is a great starting point to shift from autonomy towards aligned autonomy.
Great, Angela, and I'd love to stay with you for a moment to explore the role of AI in this shift. So our research, the report data showed that when AI is embedded well within an organization, 82% of people feel it preserves or increases their control over tasks. What concrete design or implementation choices make the difference between AI as an enabler of autonomy versus AI as a source of techno stress and surveillance, in your opinion?
Great question. So as we said, 4 out of 5 people, so 82% of people feel that AI preserves their control when it's embedded well. That last part there, that's the hook. What does embedded well actually mean? Technically embedded or behaviorally embedded? So AI is most powerful when it's in the moment as a companion, within the browser tab that you're already in, not in a separate tab, not in a separate window, not on a different monitor. Fragmentation causes frustration. So hunting for things, hunting for multiple tabs, and finding an earlier chat becomes digitally overwhelming. So embedded technically does not guarantee utilization or adoption. It's when AI is embedded behaviorally into how people actually work that we see real usage, adoption, and benefits realization. Business change is hard. People change is harder. Mastering complex change is harder still. We need to be clear on the why for each use case that is technically enabled through AI. So vision and consensus, establishing a clear why reduces noise and helps turn skeptics into advocates. Experimentation still needs direction at the end of the day. Skills, practically training people, e.g. prompt engineering or context engineering, is a game changer. It shifts people away from thinking of AI as a tool to AI as a companion. And then resources and incentives. So access to premium models at work, but also in our personal lives, is a strong incentive. The more people use AI in their own lives, the stronger their AI skills become. And those skills are transferable back to the workplace. They're transferable skills. So vision, skills, resources, incentives give us a game plan to shift from AI as a source of techno stress to AI as a source of techno joy through a structured path to mastery.
Amazing. Lisa, coming back to you, with 40% of knowledge workers emotionally withdrawing in the past year, according to our research, how do you realign roles, goals, and assignments so people can clearly see the purpose of impact of their work? And how can you measure whether that emotional connection is actually improving?
Excuse me. I think it goes back to the topic of sort of reconnecting work to outcomes and not tickets. It's ensuring that you give teams autonomy inside clear goals, and also sort of measuring connection the same way that you measure delivery. So that is clarity of priorities, perceived impact. So do they believe their work matters? And then your flow efficiency. So how much time are you spending delivering value versus waiting?
Cool, thank you. I'm going to bring tempo into the conversation now. So, Kevin, looking ahead, what are the non-negotiable features or principles you believe next generation work platforms must have to replace rigidity with adaptability and trust, so AI truly amplifies human potential rather than overwhelming it?
No, this is a good question. There's a few non-negotiables for me. First, adaptability by design. The platform should really flex how a team works, not force a team to conform to the platform's logic. Second would be genuine interoperability. The next gen platforms, they can't just be islands. They need to connect seamlessly to broader ecosystems so that context can flow freely. People aren't doing the same work in 5 different tools. And I think third, AI that really explains itself. If AI is going to influence what people are working on and when and how, it needs to be transparent about why it's making a certain suggestion. Trust is built through explainability and not just accuracy. So there has to be trust built in. I think I'd also add the human simmer, the human piece, the human measurement is a non-negotiable, right? So today's platforms are extraordinarily good at measuring activity and output. But this next generation, it needs to measure the quality of that work and that work experience alongside the productivity that we're looking at. So things like cognitive load, clarity of purpose, whether people feel like they're in control of their day. If we don't have those signals into a platform, we'll keep optimizing on the wrong things. And so having that adaptability without the metrics, it'll just lead to a faster burnout.
Cool. Vic, turning to you. Adaptavist research showed that amongst energized, motivated employees, nearly twice the global average say that they complete task discretion, even in environments where tools monitor or organize workflows. What are you doing in your own organization to preserve the level of choice while still using monitoring and orchestration tools?
Yeah, so we're doing a bunch of things. I'm going to talk about what we do that is global. And it really is about establishing a culture element of this so that people have the psychological safety as well as motivation and alignment. And so for us, that's really about visibility and connectedness. So visibility first to why we're doing what we're doing. Generally speaking, if people understand the why, they'll take ownership of the what, when, who, how, so on and so forth. And we want to proliferate that across our organization. I think that works for most organizations. And then people want connectedness too. So one of the challenges we have in technology, particularly post 2020, is being connected with folks who are remote. Oftentimes, like most of the folks on this call right now are remote. And that's really common. And even prior to that, you have folks that are in different geographies, different time zones, so on and so forth. And that it's the connectedness to people as well as the company. And so we do this with a bunch of decision-making frameworks. And these are about putting it in decision-making in the hands of everybody at the company. The first one, the only one I'll actually go through is what we call leadership axioms. And these are axioms that we ask every leader to do and to exemplify. And I ask everyone in the company to hold myself and leadership accountable. And these start with visibility and alignment. So, hey, we want to have alignment. To have alignment, we have to have visibility, and that's a continuous effort because things change so fast, particularly in the world we're in today with AI and agentic AI and an evolution that's probably at a pace that nobody's seen before. So let's say, hey, we got visibility and alignment. We then need to have accountability and support. So I'm accountable first to myself, and then I'm accountable to everybody else. And that goes for everybody at the company. And it starts with leadership to set this expectation. But we also want to support folks because things are going to move fast. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We want to make mistakes quickly, learn from them, and then remediate and improve. But we want accountability and support, particularly as we think about things cross-functionally, cross-geo, prior acquisitions that were integrated, so on and so forth. And then the last of the 3 axioms is enablement and empowerment. We want to enable and empower people to make decisions and to work autonomously, but work autonomously in a connected fashion where we have visibility to the greater purpose, aka what my work does to get to the greater purpose that we're trying to drive for our customers, but also a connectedness and visibility to what it means upstream or downstream from my peers, and being arm in arm there. And so that's really how we do it. We also have a bunch of systematic stuff as well, but it starts with constructs like the leadership axioms, which are really about facilitating visibility and connectedness.
Great, thank you. Rekha, that naturally leads into the important question about visibility and trust. Monitoring technology often gets framed as surveillance, yet the data suggests that it can coexist with high autonomy and satisfaction. Where is the line for you between healthy visibility and harmful control, and how do you communicate that distinction to your teams?
Thanks. Great question, actually. So I really like what Vic made earlier points about visibility and connectedness, because I think that's the heart of this question, right? A lot of people, when they hear the word monitoring, they immediately think of surveillance. But in practice, it really comes down to the intent and transparency. Healthy visibility really is about helping the teams understand the systems they're working in. It gives people clarity, things like what are the priorities, what are the dependencies, workloads, and risks. When teams have the visibility into these things, they can truly understand how their work is really connected to the bigger goals of the organization. I think that kind of visibility does reduce trust because people aren't working in the dark. They can actually see what's going on and they can help them make better decisions. I think where things starts to feel out of control is when the focus shifts from improving the systems to more starting to watch individual behavior, right? When data is primarily used, especially in this remote world, to question individuals, how long something took, how many tasks someone completed, then people starts to feel that they're being monitored instead of being supported. So in my experience, I think working with teams managing large, complex work, most teams really want visibility, not less, but they want the right level of visibility. So that can really help the team adapt, coordinate better, right? So one thing we try to emphasize both internally and with customers, like visibility should really help team learn and adopt, not feel monitored. And it really comes down to one single thing. Who is the data? What is the data and who is it serving? And how does it flow through the organization, right? For example, a team could look at their work at the end of sprint and they may think that they're spending a lot of time on unplanned work like support requests or customer interruptions. But that insight can actually lead to a productive conversation about priorities and capacity for the next sprint. In this particular case, I see the data really helping the team, improving how they work together. On the other hand, if the same data then ends up being questioning, why is this particular person spending certain amount of time on something without really understanding the context of that work, that can actually start to feel like a surveillance. So I often like to think of this and summarize it in this way. The same data, the directional flow, and who it serves can actually help determine whether it is actually building trust or eroding it, right? I think communication, especially from leaders, is super important to help build this trust. I think really, so the goal of visibility really shouldn't be more about watching to really help to help people understand the work. That way people feel more control of their work instead of feeling controlled by the system.
Thank you. Kevin, let's continue with the design of digital tools. Task discretion is strongly linked to the workplace satisfaction and motivation. When you introduce new digital tools or AI workflow, what specific checks or digital principles do you use to ensure it increases rather than erodes employees' ability to decide what to do and how to do it?
That's a good question. I think it's important to almost do an impact assessment before any major tool gets rolled out, and you got to ask yourself certain questions. Does this tool increase or decrease the range of choices available to the person that's using it? Does it make their decisions easier or does it make decisions for them? Can someone reasonably opt out or customize how it interacts with their particular work or their workflow that they're using? If the answers to those type of questions come back as negative to any of those, you really need to go back to the drawing board and take a look at that tool to see if it's really relevant. And even post implementation of something within the department or within your organization, measure that task discretion explicitly by doing health checks. Even someone in departments that build products, you're always doing these health checks. You're always looking at customers to see how things are going. Even internally, do those health checks. It's not just adoption and productivity, but do people feel more or less control of what they did before? How are you measuring that feedback loop? Because that becomes a non-negotiable.
And then, Kevin, many organizations buy productivity tools that end up standardizing everything and squeezing out experimentation. How do you recommend evaluating technology investment so they support adaptive work systems, allowing for local decision making, experimentation, and personal agency instead of locking people into like rigid processes without room for productivity?
Yeah, I feel like throughout my career, I have implemented products like that. The biggest red flag I think you look for is whether a tool is optimized for, because some of that rigidness that we see from tools, it's because those systems are designed for the administrator and not necessarily for that end user. Most enterprise tools are built for the people buying it and not necessarily for the people that are using them on a day-to-day basis. And so that's where that rigid, kind of creeps in to these systems. The configuration is locked down to satisfy procurement, either satisfy IT, but the people actually doing the work, they don't have the flexibility. And so in the evaluation process, you have to insist on piloting with the actual end users before any purchase decision. And that experience score, it needs to carry just as much weight as that feature checklist did for bringing that into the process for looking at that particular platform or tool. Also specifically testing for what I call, you can call them escape hatches. Can a team adapt to the tool, to their way of working, or are they completely constrained by the vendor's assumptions about how work will be done? A lot of systems are built out there with what they'll call a standard practice. And is it locked into that best practice that is perceived by the tool and the creation of that tool? Or do you have the ability to adapt your best practice with a perceived best practice that is being delivered with that rigid system? So those are things that need to be looked at.
Amazing. Thank you. Rekha, I'd like to get your perspective on the next one. I think we all can agree that the next generation of work platforms must replace rigidity and adaptability, giving teams clarity, balance, and freedom while letting AI amplify human potential rather than overwhelm it. What is one concrete change you believe leaders must make, either in how they design work, choose tools, run performance management, to run from rigid systems to truly adaptive ones that guide without dictating?
Excellent question. This is something we are constantly thinking about it, especially in this AI world, right? I think one shift that the leaders really needs to make is from moving away from what is called managing activity to what I like to call designing systems around outcomes and adaptability. For a long time, most systems were really worked on tracking activity, things like as task has been completed, hours logged, and status updates. That really made more sense when work has been done by people and managers needed a way to understand how work is progressing. In this AI world, the model really starts to break down, right? Because the work is no longer done just by human. We're really seeing three types of work that's happening today, right? There is actual work done by people, and there is work where AI is assisting people, helping generate ideas, or summarization, or prototyping, and even coding. And then there is increasingly work that is actually done by AI agents that can actually handle things on their own. So the work really is shifting away from a mixture of human work, AI-assisted work, and autonomous AI work all happening together. So when that is reality, but it really becomes, I think, harder and less useful to control to control every step of the work. I think what's more important, again, is understanding what is the outcome we want to achieve. Once that actually becomes clearer, it's easy for teams then to make decisions about how work should really happen. For instance, in Tempo, right, when we work with a lot of companies, teams are oftentimes managing hundreds or thousands of work across complex initiatives in Jira. It then becomes super easy in that environment to sort of get lost into that day-to-day activity and really lose sight of that big goal. And what can help here then is really to clearly see how the work they're doing, whether it is done by a person or an AI, is going to connect to the larger outcome. Then that can help the team to make better decisions, is how I think about it. So in summary, what I think really is like instead of creating rigid systems, we need to create a systems and that team can really align on the clarity of the goal and flexibility to how to get there. So I think about it really.
Thank you. Vic, I'm going to bring AI back into focus on a sort of a positive note. Our research showed that 82% of people using AI in the workflows feel tools give or preserve their control over tasks, more than double the rate of those without AI. Against the backdrop of decades, a long decline in task discretion is often impact on well-being. As leaders making decision on AI and digital tooling, what specific governance or design principles are you putting in place to ensure that new technology actually increase autonomy and support mental health rather than quietly reinforcing the loss of control workers are experiencing?
Great question. I think this is something everybody will continue to ask and struggle with and make progress towards as well. I think the first element of your question that's important is that 82%. I think that's pretty atypical. And so a little bit of where I start is why is that the case? The why, I believe, and I suspect others would say something similar, is the power of AI is so meaningful, right? It's so differentiated from what has existed historically. And so the folks who are earlier adopters of AI are able to see quickly the tangible results and benefits they get from it. And they also get the value of being the leader there. Hey, I am leading the charge here of adopting this new technology. And not only that, I'm leading the charge to go improve the outcomes and help the company achieve our greater purpose, our team's greater purpose around with this new technology. And that's exciting. People like to do that, generally speaking, to go, hey, create wins for themselves, for the team, for the company. And so the secondary question, really what you're asking is how do we govern that and also help people make sure that autonomy is retained. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, which is connectivity and visibility, right? How do we make sure that there is connectiveness across the company of what we're able to achieve with AI and get feedback on it and encourage others to go explore and adopt because we're getting outcomes from it. We're not just adopting tools, but we're getting the so what from it, which is we got this outcome, we did this thing faster, we did it better, higher quality, whatever the case may be. I think that's probably the biggest motivator is that, hey, we can do things more effectively, faster, so on and so forth. And then from a governance perspective, we also need that visibility. So the thing that's scary about AI is it requires data. And it's one of the most scary things. It requires data, and where is my data going? So there is a corporate governance requirement to make certain that data is not exposed in the wrong way, and that people understand what those guardrails look like. And that's because it's so new, it's something that has to be top of mind and looked at and thought about and reiterated on a continuous basis. So there's probably nothing we really talk about at Tempo that is a governance concern more than we talk about AI governance, because we want to move fast and people want to move fast. They see the results. They want to go, hey, I want to be part of that and do this thing. And it can be as simple as automating email and calendar work to things that are much more sophisticated, like what we do with our products to go help our customers align with strategy and work with outcomes, leveraging AI to do that. And so, but that governance is the primary thing is about data and making sure that data stays within the walls when it needs to stay within the walls. And that's working with across IT and then across the company for visibility and alignment, awareness. As people have awareness, they'll typically respond to it. And then just putting the actual safeguards in place as well. So if you see something that's potentially problematic, stop. Better to have I want to have speed, but not haste. I'd rather be slow than to make a mistake, particularly around security. So we're very cautious about that from a security perspective as well. So it's those two things, but it all really comes down to that connectedness, and then realizing just the value that can be created by leveraging AI, and making sure that we do encourage folks to proliferate that where it makes sense to proliferate it.
Amazing. Thank you. Rekha, let's explore the cultural side of technology adaptation. Our report described a cycle in which technostress leads to disengagement, eroded trust, and ultimately attrition, but also highlights the clarity, autonomy, and a supportive tech culture are the way to reverse it. As leaders, what concrete steps are sort of you taking and recommending to customers around training, psychological safety, and purposeful communication? And how should use tools like Jira, Confluence, Trello, or Atlassian System of Work to ensure technology experience as an enabler of human potential rather than a mechanism for policing and pressure?
Such a great question, really. So I think going back to the research, right, one thing that really stood out in that research really is the technostress. If you think about technostress, it often doesn't necessarily come from the actual technology itself, right? A lot of times, to kind of reiterating what Vic was also talking about, is really about the uncertainty, how that technology is supposed to be used. When teams understand, start to use tools without actually understanding what is the purpose behind, they tend to fill in the blanks, and then they oftentimes assume the worst. And then that's like we talked about earlier on about the monitoring and control, right? So I think the first thing we try to do both internally is really set the clarity, like I mentioned before, right? When you introduce your tool, we want leaders to really answer 3 main questions for their team. Why does this tool exist? What decisions should it help us make? And just importantly, what it is not going to be used for. I think the last one in my mind is very powerful. When you actually hear from leadership, especially the tool is not for, let's say, monitoring, it actually removes a lot of anxiety. And then the second piece is training, right? Like not just tech training. Training should really focus on how the tool is going to support the ways of work in an organization. As you're talking about, Reema, like Jira or Trello, like they're more effective, right, when they are shared visibility around work, where teams can see what is the progress, what is blocked, again, how work is connected. So that way, we don't have to go sit in meetings, keep asking for status updates. And similarly, the Confluence tools, all like tools like Confluence, can also become valuable when they actually can capture the context, the decisions, and knowledge, so that teams don't lose this information and they don't have to rediscover things repeatedly. I mean, so when all of these systems are used well, they can actually reduce the coordination overhead and then giving people more autonomy since the information is readily available. And then the third piece I think I would like to touch on is what I like to call psychological safety, which is super important as AI tools are entering the workflow, right? Like, so AI tools are very powerful when teams are experimenting with them. And then the governance thing that Vic talked about, right? Like there's a governance. A lot of time the tool, when we're evaluating, they will be making mistakes and they will be doing things in the tool that might be more experimentation. So internally at Tempo, we're very intentional how are we introducing into our product development workflows, and we can use it for prototype, and then we're really exploring opportunities for teams so that they can use all the different tools and get the benefit. This way we can help move from idea to learning much faster. Specifically with AI, I see AI as a tool to removing friction from thinking, but it is not necessarily going to replace thinking or collaboration that is going to be great in building great products. So I think that's really where I think the organizations now then can start to reverse the cycle the research describes, where technological stress leads to disengagement. Because when the tool actually supports learning and collaboration, they can actually strengthen the engagement rather than eroding it.
Amazing. And then a final forward-looking question, which I want to sort of open to all the panel itself. As leaders, when you think about the next 2 to 3 years ahead, what concrete changes will you be taking as performance measures so the technology and AI consistently reinforces trust, discretion, adaptive autonomy across your organization? So Lisa, Go for it.
I think it would start with a plan, right? I think that sometimes we jump in and we sort of run from pillar to post, trying to resolve sort of little fires in our organizations. But I think just taking a step back, having a strategy, having a plan around how you're going to change, because it's not. I mean, we've all of the speakers today have spoken about. It's not the tools, it's our processes, and it's our mindset. You know, when DevOps came about many years ago, people were like, yes, I want the DevOps button. But actually, it's a mindset, right? So it's all about changing our mindset, and change is hard. Like Attila was saying earlier, you know, putting a tool in is easy. You know, building an adoption framework is easy. But it's getting the organization to change their mindset in how we work. But I strongly believe as a leader, you know, it's doubling down on those outcomes-based results. You know, we all work with very smart people in our organizations to build the things that we build and to, you know, deliver services to our customers. And we need to shift and start to trust our people to deliver those outcomes and just to give them their autonomy and set them up for success.
Thank you. And Kevin, your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, thinking about this, it's if I look out over the horizon, it's kind of making the invisible visible in a very positive way, right? We want people to be able to see their growth. How are skills developing, for them to be able to see how their skills are developing, how their work's connecting to the outcomes that matter, as Lisa was saying, where AI is augmenting their contribution rather than replacing it. Like, how is it aiding that growth? And so I think if I look at the performance management infrastructure of the next generation, it really needs to tell that story very clearly and very personally as we continue to adapt and use all these different tools.
Thank you. And Attila, how about yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to answer from a brain science perspective, if I can. So transformation and transformations inside organizations don't run at the pace of transformation programs. They run at the pace of individual minds. Neuroplasticity, remapping pathways, adopting a new behavior happens on an individual level. And this is the thing that we need to understand when it comes to transformative work. If we truly want to see adoption, it needs to be transformation at a human level that's augmented through the programs that we deliver.
Vic, yourself?
First, I agree with everything everybody said on this. And I would get to, I'm going to add to Attila's point, which is connecting with people to why that changes. So people do have to make those individual decisions of, hey, am I in or am I out on this change? And they have to have the opportunity to make that decision. And that's where that visibility comes in. Is like, hey, this is what we're doing. More importantly, this is why we're doing it. Here's the business context. Here's the macro context. Here's the competitive landscape, so on and so forth. And here's what we believe we need to do based on that. And by the way, we're open for suggestions. If you see something else that we should be considering, please raise your hand. And that way, everybody's aligned with whatever that greater purpose is. And they're not just told to do something. They're brought into the inner circle on why we're doing something and asked, hey, what else? What should we do? And now that we've decided what we're going to do, let's go do that. With shared vision. But you can't get there, in my experience at least, without people understanding broadly why we're doing what we're doing in order for them to adopt it.
Thank you. And lastly, Rekha.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I have to say, I really like what Lisa talked about, the mind shift around planning and strategy, but I think that's where a lot of the organizations really struggle right now. And Kevin, your point about making growth visible is also pretty important, right? For me, the shift over the few years is really moving away from like measuring activity and really to understand progress and growth. again, back to what I said before, we measure the things like task completion, right? Like ticket closed or hours logged, all of them as signals that really shows how busy people are. Those made more sense when work was manual and when work visibility was needed. But I think with the AI thing, we need to really focus on activity, and then leaders really need to have signals that tells them the team is moving in the right direction. So I think when people can, the ship really is moving away now. I sort of look at it from the move away from how understanding how busy people are, but truly more making the growth visible and making progress is how I look at it.
Amazing. We've got a question from the chat as well, so let me just put that to you guys as well. The research highlights the importance of understanding the why behind work. What are some ways leaders can make that clearer in a day-to-day work?
I can take the first stab at that. First off, I think it's important to be comfortable just sharing, right? And so I know when I first started working, which was a long time ago, it was like, who knows what was the question, right? It goes back, hey, whoever knows the most of the company is more valuable, would hold on to that. As I scaled into a leadership role, I recognized very quickly that's not valuable. Having everybody understand stuff is more valuable. Everybody can't understand everything, but we want to connect it to the greater purpose. And so the key litmus test that I think is important for companies to make this happen is, does every employee at the company understand how what they do impacts what we're trying to do as a company, that connection to the greater purpose? And that starts actually with goal setting. Set goals for the company. Here's our strategy, here's our objectives, so on and so forth. That then cascades to the executive leadership team, which cascades to broader leadership management and to individual contributors. And if that is done right, individual contributors, everybody at the company, can have clarity on how what I do in customer support or professional services or engineering or sales or whatever it is, I understand how what I do connects to what we're trying to do with the company. And that helps me to be part of the why. And then we're also continuously providing visibility and alignment around how we're doing against that, what's working, what's not working. But it starts with that goal setting in order to achieve that, hey, everybody in the company understands how what they do connects to with what we're trying to do as a company, which typically is about our customers' outcomes.
I'd love to jump in there if I can, Reema, as well. So I'd like to riff on what Vic was saying there. So I think it links very closely to purpose, as Vic was saying, but at the same time, authenticity, authentic objectives. We hire really smart people, often the best candidates in a panel. So they can see through when the purpose, the objective, isn't 100% authentic. So to a point that Lisa was making earlier on the call, being transparent around the decision-making process is often a very good thing to do when going back to the purpose and the higher level goals that Vic was talking about.
One thing I just want to add as well to what Vic was saying is to reiterate the vision, because once a year we take some time, as leaders, we go away, we do a 2-day workshopping, we create some camaraderie, come back, we share the vision and the message to the rest of the organization, and then we get busy, and so it's realigning, going back to what that vision, that mission, and those goals are, and then constantly aligning it to the underlying team's work, and then making that visible, and then reiterating, creating that excitement over time to reinforce.
Great. Another question. How do you balance the tension between management direction, employee pushback? Rightly or wrongly, you can't guarantee that employees will be on board, either due to culture or on the ground experience. Do you have the period of transparency and the push on, or do you revise your strategy based on those concerns?
I can jump in first here. I think pushback from employees is, and we've been talking about this continuous loop of communication and visibility. Pushback from employees is always information. It shouldn't be seen as an obstruction, right? People on the ground are typically telling you something about implementation, a reality that wasn't visible from when these plans were set. So that instinct to push through these threats resistance, see it as a culture problem when it's actually a signal problem. So that said, can you run an organization by consensus? No. So the practice balance is this: how do you hold firm on the what and the why, but stay generally open on the how? And so I think it's important, leadership owns the direction and the outcomes, but the path to getting there, it should be shaped by that ground level feedback.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Vic.
I was going to say, I'm going to add something to that because I couldn't
Go
agree
for it.
And the other thing that I think leadership has to make visible and transparent is that leadership is rarely the right place for day-to-day decisions to be made. I can guarantee you, if somebody in sales comes and asks me a question about some deal they're working on, I'm the wrong person to answer that question. Somebody else is going to be closer to that than I am. If it's a strategic question, I'm probably the right person. Or if it goes past some certain governance level, I'm going to ask for other people's input. And I think that's part of what helps people adopt that why, is that making sure that the teams know, because if we've done what I mentioned earlier around the leadership axioms and done the last one, which is enablement and empowerment, part of that enablement is recognizing and making sure people recognize that you are more informed to make decisions than I am as a leader. And so I need you to do that. And when people feel, again, that they're part of that process, then they're more comfortable pushing back. They're more comfortable providing their input. And by the way, leadership needs that input. At the end of the day, Kevin's right. You ultimately have to make decisions and move forward. But in my experience, if people feel that they've been heard and that it's been considered and they understand as well why a decision is made, even if it's counter to what they might have said, it's much easier to have shared vision, which is really about disagree and commit when that's required.
What both Kevin and Vic were saying there. So transformation implies change just by very nature of the word, and change is disruptive, or it should be. Innovation implies breaking with the status quo. So from that, our leaders, our managers can take inspiration that there will always likely be change resistance or even change fatigue. So techniques to answer the question how, stakeholder mapping and engagement strategies for each one of those stakeholder groupings, critical when you're starting to think about a transformation program. That activity, stakeholder mapping and engagement strategies, does not imply ignoring feedback. Linking back to what Kevin and Vic were saying, we have to listen to feedback and see if the strategy has survived first contact.
Amazing. And then how should companies introduce AI tools so employees feel empowered rather than threatened? Question for all.
I can take that, I think. I think we sort of touched on this. The biggest mistakes companies make when introducing AI tools is really focusing too much on the technology and not really enough on how people are going to actually experience that, right? If we talk about, if we say to employees that we're going to introduce AI, the first really comes to my mind, how does it affect my role? The starting point really has to be the clarity about the intent, right? I'm really helping frame AI is something that's going to help you do a better job, right? Rather than positioning it as something that could replace your role. It's really more about removing a lot of the repetition and how do you time to market faster. And the other piece is giving teams to experiment safely. We talked about governance, right? When people are really encouraged to try tools, learn what they have and share their examples, technology really starts to feel like something they can control rather than something that is actually imposed on them. Leaders really play a major role in this modeling this behavior. If leaders openly talk about how they're using AI in their work, where is it helping, how is it not, it can actually normalize the learning process for everyone. So I think in my mind, when you introduce AI tools, it's less about deploying tools, but more really about creating a culture where people are seeing these technologies as something that can expand what they do, not something that actually threatens.
And just to add to that, I also think that, from a tactical point of view, I think that organizations need to decide on sort of what is their goal in using AI, giving the organization some guardrails, and then mapping the tools that they have selected to use, because there is, so many AI tools out there, mapping sort of business value to what those tools are there for. And I think Attila also mentioned earlier about having AI as a team member rather than a tool, and building sort of taxonomy around that to get everybody across the organization on board.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kev. I'll go after you.
Okay. I was just gonna make a couple comments because recently, we were rolling out a new AI tool, and so I think it's important that. And I think this has been said about the transparency, right? Because there is anxiety with some of these new AI tools, and so if people will assume the worst, and unless that transparency is out there. So giving people the feeling of being a part of that rollout, the agency of that rollout, being part of co-designing and implementing and piloting that, and I'm just gonna end with this: invest in real training. Like AI is no different than other software in the past. Like train everyone. Reduce that anxiety. Dropping a tool on people and just expecting adoption is, that is the stress inside of technology. AI is no different. Everyone needs to be trained. There needs to be governance, and you add that with visibility and transparency around why it's being done, and you're going to get a better result from it.
Building off what everyone has already said so far. So leaders modeling the behaviors, right? That's key to most transformation and change initiatives. So Vic was, it was Kevin that was talking about, pilot teams, creating those early success stories in the organization. That's also, I think, part of the how a company introduces AI. So be intentional around those pilot teams, be intentional about sharing those internal success stories, and model the behaviors to each other rather than it being dictated onto you.
I do kind of like what we touched on about AI as less of a tool, but more as a new kind of a team member, right? If you frame that as somebody that's a partner, if like every person has their own strengths and AI got their own strengths, it's really good in processing large amount of information, summarization. I use that a lot for such purposes. Whereas humans, on the other hand, great in like judgment, creativity, collaboration, and understanding context. So the real question really becomes then, how do we actually design works such that human and AI can complement together? I think when people tend to see AI more as something that can reduce and speed up some of the tedious work, it starts to feel more like a partner and a team member.
Great. So I think we can sort of wrap up now and sort of call it a successful sort of expert hour. So thank you all for such thoughtful insights, and thank you for everyone that's joined today on our Adaptavist Expert Hour. A big thank you to our partner Tempo Software for joining the conversation and obviously contributing to the research that shaped today's discussion as well. From today's discussion, a few practical takeaways stood out. Equip managers to lead through principles and outcomes, not micromanagement. Use AI and digital tools to reduce noise and context switching so people can focus on meaningful work. Make the why behind the work visible through documentation, transparency, and communication, and invest in training, psychological safety, and open dialogue so teams feel confident experimenting with technology in ways that work best. So if you'd like to get a deeper dive of these ideas, we'll be sharing the full research report and the on-demand recording for today's session. And before we go, we'd love to hear from you and just two things that I want you to keep in mind as well. What's one thing you'll make to see how your team uses technology, and where do you see the biggest opportunity to increase autonomy in your organization? Feel free to drop your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we'll love to keep the conversation going. But thank you again for spending the hour with us, or nearly the hour with us. We've got 5 minutes to spare. But I've been your host, Reema, and I'll see you on the next Adaptavist Expert Hour. So any questions, please feel free to add them, and we'll be happy to answer any of them as well.
Thank you so much, Reema, and thank you everybody out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.